The ranch is coming under renewed scrutiny because of details in newly released FBI files. Last month, the state's House of Representatives voted to create a bipartisan truth commission looking into allegations of criminal activity there. Joining me now is a member of that commission, New Mexico State Representative Mariana Anaya. Thank you so much for being here. Look, we were looking through the files, and in late January, there was a 2019 email received by a local radio host that alleged that somewhere in the hills outside of the Zorro, the ranch, 2 foreign girls were buried on orders of Jeffrey and Madam G. That is what was written. That is, of course, an unverified allegation. Do you know what authorities are looking for? Are they potentially looking for bodies there?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I think at this point, anything is in the realm of possibility. A big misstep that happened previously was that people didn't listen to survivors. People did not listen to tips that came in. And so for us, we are taking everything into consideration. Now, in New Mexico, something that is true for us is that a lot of the history lives in our people, it lives in the land, and so it is not out of the realm of possibility for us to be looking for these types of things.
In so many cases, the police and justice system, as you just alluded to, it failed the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and other men who took part in horrible deeds. Do you know to what extent the happenings at the ranch there in New Mexico were investigated in the first place?
To our understanding, there was never a full investigation that was done. And that's part of the reason we formed the Truth Commission. We're actually working really closely with the New Mexico Department of Justice, which of course is the prosecutory arm. We are the investigatory arm. And we know that not everything is going to rise to the level of a crime, but we do know that as a Truth Commission, we want to be sure that we are telling the entirety of the story. Right? What does it mean for an entire community to have this happening in their own backyard? What does it mean to take responsibility for that? What does it mean for the state to take responsibility for any mishappenings? And what does it mean to hold people accountable for their crimes? And so we're working together with the Department of Justice here in New Mexico to make sure that that happens.
I want to ask you about that because other countries are making arrests. We saw the arrest of former Prince Andrew. We're seeing resignations of very powerful people. In your investigation, do you see any chance that the same will happen here in the U.S.?
It's a possibility. I think at the federal level, there is so much disappointment in the fact that there hasn't been action taken. But here in New Mexico, we're really proud that we are leading the way. We are saying, what, we believe that there is truth in what the survivors are saying, and we're here to investigate it.
Jeffrey Epstein's longtime accountant testified before the House Oversight Committee today as Congress is seeking answers on how the late sex trafficker accumulated his wealth and how it was used for illegal activities. Richard Kahn managed Jeffrey Epstein's vast finances and investments. He's the co-executor of Epstein's estate, and he told lawmakers today that he didn't know the extent of Epstein's crimes until after his death. It's pretty notable testimony given the various cases against Jeffrey Epstein and all the public detailed reporting about his crimes while he was very much still alive. Kahn also testified, quote, that we tracked the expenditures as meticulously as possible, including gifts by Epstein to women and men. The gifts represent a very small fraction of his spending. I did not see them as red flags for abuse or trafficking. My source tonight is a member of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California. And thank you, sir, for being here. First off, do you believe him when he says he didn't know about this when Jeffrey Epstein was alive?
I don't know, but what I will say is he wasn't very forthcoming about other men who may have been involved in the abuse. At one point, he said, look, there were hundreds of survivors who were paid settlements, and there were people other than Epstein and Maxwell involved because the survivors said that. But beyond that, he really was not that forthcoming.
So there's been some confusion tonight or back and forth with the House Oversight Committee and the Republicans on your committee that I'm hoping you can clear up. They say you were trying to have a gotcha moment about President Trump in regards to a question that you asked, that the accountant was not referring to a Trump accuser when he was talking about a settlement the Epstein estate had paid. Can you explain what happened?
So I asked about the woman who has alleged that Donald Trump raped her when she was 13. Now, as we know, the FBI released one of those witness interviews first. They didn't release 3 of the witness interviews. I pushed for that, as did Thomas Massie. Then they released the other 3 to comply with Thomas Massie and my law. I have no idea whether those are true or not. One of the things her attorney has said is that she was paid a settlement from the Epstein estate. So I said, this Jane Doe 4, and I made the actual case number, and I said, did the Epstein estate pay this survivor? And the lawyer took a brief pause, and he said, can I just confirm to make sure we're talking about the right person? I said, this is the person who has accused President Trump of rape. And then the con said, yes, that person was paid. Hours later, 5 hours later, he said, oh, no, I was talking about a different woman. So he backtracked on that, and people will be able to see the testimony. So I don't know which time he's telling the truth. Maybe he genuinely forgot, but the transcript is pretty clear when people see it that I was talking about the woman who accused President Trump of abuse and rape.
Okay, because Comer later says that he testified he never saw any transaction paid to the president or his family. In terms of what we'll see in this, what were your other takeaways from his testimony? Did you learn anything that you believe helped this investigation? The
biggest takeaway is that how many people were financially involved with Epstein at a significant level. 2 people who we allegedly already know, Les Wexner and Leon Black. And I just have to say this because I was up at Dartmouth at the invitation of the university president. Dartmouth still has Leon Black up on their buildings. That is appalling, given all that has come out. And they need to remove that, and there needs to be accountability for some of these men who have very serious allegations of having abused or raped young girls. And so, he also talked about the Rothschilds being involved and a lot of information about other people who had deep ties allegedly to Epstein.
The Trump administration continues to face fallout from its handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files, including from both chambers of Congress. A bipartisan group of senators is calling for a probe into the Justice Department's redactions of the files, accusing the Trump administration of violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act and re-victimizing survivors. And the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer said this week that they are moving quickly to schedule depositions from Attorney General Pam Bondi and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. This all comes as the committee held a closed-door deposition with Epstein's long-time accountant Richard Kahn. Kahn told members that several high-profile figures transferred large sums of money to the convicted sex offender, but claimed he was not aware of the nature or extent of Epstein's abuse of so many women until after Epstein's death. He also claimed he had no personal relationship with Epstein. And next week, Epstein's personal lawyer, Darren Endike, will testify before the committee. He and Kahn are co-executors of Epstein's estate. Joining us now, a member of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw of Virginia. It's so fascinating that this man was doing all of this in bright sunlight and so many people, nobody know anything. I want to play something from James Comer on how long he thinks the House Epstein investigation will continue. Let's play that.
How long do you think it's going to last? If you finish it by the end of this Congress?
Well, that's our goal, and I certainly hope so. I hope it's before the end of the Congress. But as we all see, anytime more documents are released or more testimonies given, it seems like more cans of worms are opened.
I think the American people do deserve an answer to that. How long is this going to go on? I imagine Democrats will, if they take back the House, you guys may continue this. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, are we learning anything that can bring some actual accountability?
Well, I don't think the investigation can begin to end until we have all the files released, right? Chairman Comer's talking about cans of worms. Half of the cans or half of the worms are still locked up. We don't know. So we got to get all the files out. We got to get the illegal redactions unredacted, and then we got to follow every lead that comes from that. I don't know how long that will take. Obviously, we want to move as quickly as we can, but we got to have all of the information before we can determine what the timeline is.
Are you guys getting anywhere with all of the documents coming out?
No, I don't think we've seen a lot of progress on that. However, I do think we'll start to get somewhere when we depose the Attorney General Pam Bondi shortly. And Chairman Comer has said he wants to bring her in as quickly as possible. He didn't want to bring her in. Mm-hmm. She's coming in only because there was a vote to force a subpoena to bring her in. He didn't try to bring her in. And look, she's going to have to answer hard questions about why the files haven't been released. They missed the deadline. I'm not going to say the cover-up is worse than the crime, because these crimes are horrific.
Yeah.
But the cover-up itself is a crime, in my view. She's going to have to answer questions about that.
And just to add on to that, our colleague Lisa Rubin reported yesterday that among the missing documents from these files is still notes and memos reflecting interviews with women alleging abuse by other prominent men. But Congressman, if you guys do take back the majority and you have subpoena power come January, are you going to subpoena Donald Trump to come and testify before Congress?
I support subpoenaing Donald Trump to come and testify. I think, especially given the Clinton depositions that we went through and the precedent that was established there, where not only did Chairman Comer say, you got to come in, but you got to come in when I say you.
Really interesting, but what's happening down in New Mexico is sort of accelerating the investigation into Donald Trump and what he and his buddy Jeff may have done. And I think there's other factors as well. Like this not necessarily new, but this renewed and intensified call for Donald Trump to be subpoenaed by Congress is, I think, driven by the investigation expanding, not just in New York, not just in Florida, not just in the island, but specifically now crossing the country, almost to the other coast. It's really showing that this is a much bigger and broader thing, and of course, there's also international effects now with what's happening in Britain with this case. But also, I do think that Republicans made a critical error in dragging Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton into testifying. By bringing in Bill, I don't think there's any argument to not bring in Donald. Right? They both knew their buddy Jeff. They both traveled with him in certain areas. They both hung out with him. They are both presidents. They've both been president. Trump is a current, but also a former. They are technically both former presidents. There's a reason why things have heated up in the last, 4 or 5 days. And I think it's also very critical that we understand the war isn't working to silence this. Yes, it's being talked about less. That's true. If you look at Google search trends, as the conflict in the Middle East rose, the searches for specifically Trump Epstein did decline. That is true. But the story isn't gone, and the members of Congress that are really dedicating themselves, correctly so, to bringing justice in this case have not changed their perspective. So Donald, much like in the summer, last summer, when you thought shutting down the government would kill this story, little did you know that you just caused it to explode when things finally went to the head.